I'm Hannah Moore, CFP, a practicing financial planner and educator. I'm on a mission to change the way people think and talk about money. Let's get started. I had a conversation this week with somebody who asked me, how do I make sure that I actually build wealth, that I become wealthy instead of just being well off? And I thought it was a fascinating question to really be thinking about and talking about. And now, as we get into this conversation, a lot of this is going to come down to definitions, right? What does it mean to be well off versus wealthy? And again, you might say, they're one and the same for me, perhaps, but let's get down to kind of the heart of what I think this person was asking me. And in our conversation, what I gathered that they were asking. So this idea of well off, right? When I think of somebody who's well off, I think of somebody who probably has a higher income salary, especially compared to those around them. They're able to buy things that maybe the average person in their life can't buy, that they're able to go on trips. They're able to portray this image that they're well off. They're living a comfortable life, right? Now, the question becomes, when I look at somebody who's wealthy, I could say the same things, right? They possibly are buying the new car, a bigger house, whatever it may be. But when I look from my perspective as a financial planner, to me, the difference between what's well off versus wealthy is what's behind the curtain, what's behind the scenes. And I will tell you, as a practicing financial planner, as somebody who gets to peek inside of people's financial lives and help guide them in this process, that there is a huge difference between somebody who's just well off versus wealthy and what true wealth looks like. So when I think of somebody who is well off, it's not sustainable, or perhaps it's sustainable while they're working, but there's not this depth, right? It's not necessarily sustainable if they quit their job or they get laid off or whatever that can look like. When I look at wealthy people, it is a lifestyle that is sustainable for them, right? And I'm going to talk about dollars in just a second because I think that's a really, really interesting idea. About the dollars that we tie to things. But when I think of somebody who is well off, there is a facade that's there. There is a facade of we have lots of money. And yes, they can perhaps afford the lease payment. They could afford, the house payment. But the question for me becomes, okay, what's behind the curtain? Do they have the plan in place behind this to make this sustainable for the rest of their life? Because for me, that's really how we can build wealth. How do we make your financial situation sustainable for you for the rest of your life, right? It's a whole different ballgame. Now, people who are well off, they get to experience things, they get to do things, like they get to see all those things. And to some of my clients' points when we have these conversations that they could die young. That is always a possibility on the table. But for most people, that's not a plan that we want to be banking on by any stretch. So when I think of well off, I think of somebody who has to continue working. They have to continue, and not just continue working, because most people have to continue working, right, to do this. But they have to continue to perform at this high stress job. They have to continue. They don't have the options in order for them to make changes that they want to be making in their life. There is this level of stress. There is this level of stress that if something goes wrong, that everything is going to come crashing down, right? That they're not going to be able to afford their lease payment. They're not going to be able to afford their home payment. They're not going to be able to afford these things. There was a recent study that said 25% of people who make over $250,000, so households who make over $250,000, are living paycheck to paycheck. And I'll tell you, as a financial planner, that does not surprise me one bit. I've seen it. People making a lot more than that, living paycheck to paycheck. And that to me is somebody who's well off because they're building those blocks behind the scenes. There's this level of, like I said, stress that's kind of there. Now, let's compare that to this idea of wealthy. And for me, wealthy is about how do we build sustainability into your financial plan where you're going to be able to make this sustainable for your life, that you're not just going to be able to, go on these lavish vacations now, but you're going to be able to continue that if you wanted to do it. And this isn't just once you reach this level of financial independence. I don't mean that, but it means that you're being intentional and thoughtful about your money in a way that you're building your wealth. You're building your wealth to where you know that the decisions that you're making today, how they fit in with a larger picture, the larger narrative of your financial life, right? And this is where God, this is why I love financial planning, because it gets so nuanced with every family that I work with every individual person of what does that look like, because it can look very, very different for you from somebody else. So I want to touch on this idea of how much wealth, like how much money do you need to have to be considered wealthy? And for me, tying this back to this idea of sustainability, right? Would your plan sustain the loss of you or your partner? Would they be okay, right? Making sure that you have those pieces in place. Would you be able to, eventually retire someday? Like those are some of the pieces that are there. And while also being able to like live wealthy now. I'm a huge, huge believer in that. And the core idea behind that is that you're really living by the values of what's most important to you in your family. But let's look at this idea of wealthy is sustainable wealth. So when I have some clients that I work with, so I have clients from all spectrums, right, of financial wealth. And one of the things that's really interesting to me is this idea of enough. And I know I talk about this a lot of how much is enough, right? Everybody has this. I don't care how much money you have. I don't care if you're a billionaire. There will always be somebody who has more money than you. There will always be something bigger, nicer to buy, right? But people who can figure out what is the life that I want to live, what are the values that I want to live by, those are those are my happiest clients, like hands down. It's very, very clear to me. So when we think about this idea of wealth as sustainability, I have clients right now who are retired living on Social Security who are as happy as can be. Their entire lifestyle is on their Social Security income. Yes, they have investments. I manage those investments for them, but like they're living off of less than $5,000 a month and perfectly happy. I have other clients who couldn't imagine living off of $5,000. But when I look at what is sustainable for this family that I'm thinking of in particular, their Social Security is more than enough to cover what their expenses are. That's a pretty darn good place to be. So when I start talking to people and I start having these conversations about what is your financial situation? What does this look like? If somebody is already used to not spending a lot of money, I'm a lot less worried about their financial situation than somebody who needs $150,000, $200,000 to live off of, because there's a lot more that you're going to have to do from that side, from a planning standpoint and saving and investing. But this idea of wealthy, a sustainability, is not about tying it to numbers. It's tying it to a lifestyle and a way that you want to live. So let me wrap up by giving you guys another story. I was talking to a family who didn't have much, really anything saved for retirement. They're, getting up in age, they're in their 50s. They're like, hey, what are we going to do? What is this going to look like? We started looking at their expenses, and they're on track to have their house paid off, by the time they're 65 or 70. So they've owned a home. They're, have on track to have it paid off. And so we were looking at what are their options. And so I had them pull their Social Security statement. And so we started looking at this, and I was like, okay, well, once we take out the mortgage, and just as a key from a financial planner standpoint, you have to make sure you're still paying your property tax and your homeowner's insurance, because that often gets rolled up in there. So just be careful on that if you're doing this exercise at home. But we were looking at their Social Security statement and realized that their monthly expenses would be covered by Social Security if they would wait to take their Social Security at age 70. So that's a pretty powerful idea, right? That if they can wait till they're 70 to take Social Security, all of their living expenses would be covered. So in this conversation with them, yes, I still think that they, if they're able to be able to save, that's only going to be a good thing for health crises, for extra things that you want. Like I'm always going to be an advocate for saving and investing money. But the question became shifting this perspective, right? So how do we make this sustainable for them? And for this family, it was, okay, how are you going to have a job, have a career in something that you could do until you're 70, right? We know that a lot of people don't have that option. And again, there's a lot of health issues that come up. We could have a whole nother conversation on that. But in thinking about how are they planning for retirement, yes, there needs to be a portion of this where they're saving, they're making sure they're staying out of debt, all of these pieces. And when we look at their career aspect, what do they need to do to change jobs in order to make sure that they are in a less stressful role, that it's not physical labor that they're doing, that they're in a role that they can age well in, right? That's a huge planning consideration for a lot of people. And it's just a whole different perspective when we think about this idea of living wealthy. And then it comes down to, now, what would you change in your life? And what's so great about this family is that I was sitting and talking to them, and they were like, not much. We get to see our kids on a regular basis. We like our community. We like our home. Perhaps we want to take another vacation or two, but we can, save up for that. Realizing that they were already living this life they wanted to live. And so just by some few adjustments, even mindset shifts, like, they're living wealthy, even though when we start looking at some of the, bigger studies out there of like, what is wealth in this country, they may not have the net worth that other people would have, but I'll tell you, they're a heck of a lot more confident in their finances and a heck of a lot more just happy with their life than a lot of people that I see. So yes, building wealth is incredibly important. That's what I do. That's my day job, is helping people do this. But keeping perspective on, how do you build sustainable wealth? How do you build a lifestyle that is sustainable for you? You can do it at any level of income. That is, to me, what the difference is between being wealthy versus just being well off and being able to afford nice things right now, but maybe not being able to afford them in the future, or not being able to weather the storms of life. Thanks for listening to this episode of Everyday Money with Hannah Moore. If you like what you heard, subscribe and check out livewealthynow.com. We have a lot more resources to help you live wealthy now.